We're now going to ask you to ask the candidates some questions. So please get your hands high. We've got a couple of runners with microphones. We're going to take 2 questions at one time. We're going to ask 1 question at a time, if that makes sense. So, here at the front, Johnny. And this man here as well, Lisa. Please also, we're on Twitter, so if you hashtag GEYork, I will be checking the Twitter live feed, and I'll ask you questions on Twitter if you don't want to put your hand up as well. And please tweet reactions and tweet at York Union, and you can tweet the MPs as well. So, first question, please.
Given the recent HSBC tax dodging scandal, will the candidates support a tax dodging bill in the first 100 days of the next Parliament, and will they particularly support clauses in the bill to prevent British companies from dodging tax in developing countries?
James, do you want to tackle that first?
Yes. We do need to do much more work on tax dodging. I think that's really clear. Tax dodging is something that is almost universally carried out by big businesses who can afford a large accountants department, which then gives them a competitive advantage over small businesses which might be just starting up with a new idea which could go somewhere, only they're suffocated by tax at the start. Now, one of the big problems we have in this country is the complexity of our tax code. It's the most complicated in the European Union. And as a result, it's no surprise that this country employs more tax accountants and tax lawyers than the rest of the European Union combined. So what we first need is radical simplification, so that that waste of resources can stop being spent and we can see a more competitive market for all with more money coming in. We've done some of that work already. The deals made with Switzerland and Liechtenstein have brought in £2 billion of previously unpaid tax. It's also produced lists of people who were avoiding tax already, and I would have liked to see much more done, as you'd expect to see with people who perhaps claim more benefits than they should. These people should be facing criminal charges much more regularly. Now, you talked about British businesses avoiding taxes in other countries, and you're absolutely right that we should be doing that. But I think it's vitally important as well that we stop international businesses basing themselves in Luxembourg or the United States or the Republic of Ireland, and then claiming that they make all of their profits from customers in Britain over there. We should be saying, you make the money here, you pay the tax here. And there are very few companies that think that they can call themselves a global business without having a base in the United Kingdom. We should be using that as leverage to make sure that we get that money coming into our coffers so that we can reduce the load on everybody else and make sure we have a fairer system where everybody contributes and we actually can fund the services that we all rely on.
Thank you. So Joe, how, as a party out of power, how would Labour tackle it if you got in?
Well, we double the fines for tax dodging. You know, we closed the tax cap. We would the dormant company loophole. We closed that. We would make sure that companies registered in tax havens have to publish the list of owners. We strengthened the independent scrutiny by giving the National Audit Office more powers. We closed the Eurobond exemption. We close employment law loopholes. I mean, I can read off what Labour would do, but I want to address the question. I do support the tax dodging bill. Where have you gone? Sorry. Yes, I do support the tax dodging bill. I think the campaign has been very strong, and to the many people who've emailed got back to I do support it. I think the other thing is to emphasise we have fewer people working in HMRC than we did when this government came to power, and that was following a massive reduction since the merger. So we need to put more money into employing people who can actually deal with the very complex schemes that people use to avoid. I'm very interested in the work of Richard Murphy, the Tax Justice Network. I think they've got some very good ideas, but I think Labour's policies will actually bring in significantly more than has previously been outlined. It's something that offends everybody morally. It's wrong. Starbucks, Amazon, all of these companies can get away with it. Everyone should contribute, and I wholly support your campaign.
Thank you. Julian, why have Conservatives allowed this to happen? Is there a possibility to fix it?
That's just what Joe didn't mention was that since 2010, the coalition government has closed 40 tax loopholes and stopped £80 billion worth of tax evasion that was incurring under the previous government for many years. So a lot of work has been done by the coalition government. Should more work be done? Yes, it should be done. As James absolutely rightly says, we want companies who are based in the UK, who make stuff in the UK, to pay tax in the UK. They shouldn't be allowed to sort of have an office over in Liechtenstein or wherever with one person sat at a desk and pay tax there. We have to make sure they pay tax in the UK. But also, we have to make sure we have competitive tax rates in the UK that are attractive to businesses to locate here, as big employers, and ultimately to pay their taxes here. And that's what the government has been trying to do with corporation tax. Do I think things need to go further? As I say, yes, I think they do. After this next Parliament, I think they will go further. I think you're going to get a number of parties, however the formation of the next government is, and whether it is another coalition of a number of different parties, I think this is going to be one of the things that's definitely on the agenda of the new government, and quite seriously. So I think things will move quite quickly, but my point is, a lot has been done already, and a lot of loopholes have been closed. The problem is that there's always going to be more loopholes for these clever accountants for companies to try and find. So we've got to make sure it's not as financially attractive for these companies to go looking for these loopholes. And we've got to make sure there is the fines there to back that up as well, if they are breaking the law. And I think the government has done quite a bit of this, as I say, stopping £80 billion worth of tax evasion that was occurring under the previous government. They hadn't done anything about it. We have stopped that. But with what the gentleman says there, what happened with HSBC, that was scandalous. We've got to make sure that cannot happen again.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman here.
Well, thank you. Two questions in a sense, partially addressed to Julian, on one. What is the most likely to govern your vote? The party line, as defined by the whips, or the overall whip of the overall will of the electorate? Because I think priorities seem to have gone around in a lot of cases.
Okay, Julian.
The other one is...
we're just going to have one question, if that's okay, because everyone's there. Okay, Julian, how do you respond?
Yeah, thanks, John, for that. I mean, you know me. We've been in correspondence for many years, before I was an MP and since I've been an MP. And you know that I haven't always voted for the government. I have voted against the government on a number of occasions. And I have voted, as I say, I have voted against the government on a number of occasions. You've got to have in parliaments, you can't have 650 independent MPs. If you had 650 independent MPs, it just wouldn't work, it wouldn't operate. You've got to have a political party structure that operates within parliament, within government. But at the same time, you have to make sure, I've always believed as an MP, you have to make sure you are ultimately accountable to your constituents, because they're ultimately the people who employ you. So if a local issue comes up that means that I would have to vote against the government policy, but put my constituency first, I would always do that. And that would be my stance. But at the end of the day, I am, if re-elected as a Conservative MP, as part of a Conservative government, hopefully, but or as an MP within the Conservative Party. And I think you have to balance that out. But as I say, ultimately, the question will always be, and should be, on big issues like that, it should be constituency over party.
Your independence is
you asked the question. Joe, how would you vote? What would rule your vote?
I mean, party line or the will of the electorate. I mean, I think I alluded to it in that speech. I'm not somebody who's ever really I've been at odds, particularly under Tony Blair, with the Labour Party's national line. I've always stood up for what I believe in. And some of the MPs who inspire me the most, you know, are MPs such as John McDonnell, people on the left of the Labour Party, who sometimes, you know, 90% of the time go with the Labour whip's line, but sometimes you have to stand up and you have to take a contrary view. I've given examples of issues in the past where I would have voted against the Labour whip. The Labour Party is not, we're sort of a coalition within a party. You know, we draw our strength by being united as a party, and that's how we can actually deliver, you know, how we can get into government. But within that, we have to have points of difference, and we have to respect each other's opinions. I've been a councillor for the past 4 years, and where we debate every issue, contrary to some popular belief, and vote on it before we take a line. We take a collective position. I believe in collectivism, and you know, getting behind it once you've voted. But sometimes the decisions that have been taken at a national level haven't been in consultation with the rest of the parliamentary party and the wider Labour movement. Certainly at a local level, you know, if there are things that do affect constituents, I'm not going to just say, you know, I'll back whatever the popular opinion of my constituency is, because that's not always what you should do. You've got to do what's right, and where, you know, your moral compass lies. And I've never done things to try and get to being a parliamentary candidate. I've done what I believe in, and I'll continue to do that if I'm elected.
Thank you. Just before we allow James to answer, the people who are running around the mics, can you make sure you hold them so they're not rubbing against the legs? A bit of background noise. Okay, James.
Okay, thanks for the question. Obviously, I'm not an MP, so you can't look at my voting record to judge it, as you can with Julian. And yeah, maybe he did vote against the whip, you know, once or twice. And again, with Joe, as a Labour councillor, you know, he says he's very independent, but if you look at his voting record, he's always voted, as far as I can see, with a Labour council that has actually not done anything with funds given it by central government to protect people against the worst elements of the bedroom tax. It's refused money from central government that would have allowed the council tax to stay low. Instead, they put it up every year, apart from this year, when, funnily enough, we've got an election around the corner. And which has also just put a tax on your green bin collection. So, you know, that perhaps shows you where the whip hand lies there. Now, all I can tell you is that at the last general election, you'll know all about the tuition fees pledge Liberal Democrat candidates made. Now, I was one of more than 100 candidates to write a joint letter to the Times newspaper saying that the proposed settlement between the coalition government was not good enough, and we wanted a better deal for students. And I remember the man from the local newspaper calling me up and saying, "We just got this letter, but this is terrible, isn't this political suicide for you? You'll never be a candidate again, what are you thinking about?" But here I am. And the truth of the matter is that my party, unlike the other parties, our candidates and our policies are wholly settled on a one-member, one-vote system of every member. My vote is worth just as much as Nick Clegg's. There are no big business or trade union handouts for the democracy here. It's just people, individual people, which is at the very root of certainly my liberalism. So I've demonstrated already that I'm prepared to make a stand against my party leadership, and I hope to be able to show that I can make that stand for the people of York in Parliament over the next 5 years.
Okay, we can do it later. Can we have 2 more questions? The gentleman who's desperate over there, and the lady at the front.
I'd like to address a very local issue, which is the question of gypsies and travellers. There are quite a substantial number of gypsies and travellers in York living on substandard sites. The need, I think, is urgent for some new sites. So can the candidates tell us whether they would support the demand for new sites for gypsies and travellers in and around the city, and if so, where they would site them?
Julian?
Yeah, I'll take that head on. I mean, you'll know, by asking that question, you'll know my position on this within the local plan. I've been very clear within the local plan that I don't believe gypsy and traveller sites should be located in the green belts, in greenfield sites, which is where all the sites being proposed in the local plan have been put forward so far. they have been moved. We had one at Dunnington that was proposed, and I fought against that, and it was taken out of the plan. The council then moved one to Elvington. Again, the next round of the plan, again, in Greenbelt, on the edge of the village, where there's no very little bus services. Again, it was taken out of the plan. It was seen as unsustainable. We're now at a point where, in the local plan, there is 2 proposed sites in the last draft. Now, whether they stay in, we don't know. We won't see the final draft until probably June, July now. But the last 2 proposals was one at Neyburn, or not actually in Neyburn, just on the outskirts of the designer outlet opposite the sewerage works there. Again, no bus services, no adequate services, no footpaths, no possibility of walking to school there, the local school, again, in Greenbelt locations. And then the final one that they've been proposing is next to the Hare Wyn waste site, which again is in Greenbelt land. It was a site that the next door site was also proposed for Gypsy and Traveller site by the council. It's a council-owned site, but it was turned down. They said it was unsuitable because of the location, the lack of bus services, the lack of the problem was it was located too close to the actual landfill site and the problems that would cause with travellers living there. That was turned down, thrown out. And suddenly now they've got a site right next door that they accept. So for me, the principle is we've got to locate, if we have a Gypsy and Traveller requirement, and I believe, I don't quite agree with you on this when you say, I believe that the council have, from our side of the figures, they haven't calculated them properly, because when they've been calculating Traveller figures, they've been actually counting people within the survey to justify traveller need. They've been looking at traveller families who've been housed in bricks and mortar for a period of time and asking whether they would like to go back out on site. And I don't believe that is a need. I don't believe that is a requirement. So I think the way they've calculated the requirement is wrong, and I've challenged that along with many other people, and they have now started to reassess that. So we'll see, I think when we get to June, July, we'll see those figures, those requirement figures come down. But there will still be a requirement within that will have to be met within the local plan. And if you look at planning policy, these sites should be located in a sustainable location. And that's most likely going to be brownfield sites in more urban locations where you have better facilities, where you have access to local bus services, where children on those sites can walk to school, where there is adequate local healthcare facilities on the doorstep. Not in the middle of nowhere, in the Greenbelt, away from Labour council walls, which is ultimately how it was manufactured within the local plan.
Okay, Joe, please respond, and feel free to respond to James as well.
Yeah, I'll take James' point first. I mean, I cannot quite understand how you can stand and criticise me for my record on the effects of the bedroom tax at a local level. That is unbelievable. Liberal Democrats have had several opportunities to get rid of the bedroom tax, and they failed to take it every time. Look at that the effects of your welfare reform that you've imposed on people. So, I mean, that's just staggering. Anyway, Julie, travel site. Thank you for asking that question. I'm
very sure I'm going to be really interested in your answer, actually.
Yeah, good. Where to start, really? First of all, do I support sites in the Greenbelt, on Greenfield sites, the sites that are in the local plan? Yes, 100% yes. I am in favour of properly housing all our communities in York. People who've lived in York and North Yorkshire for centuries, who have roots here, they obviously by definition, travellers like people travel around. Their roots are rural, and there should be provision made available for people to live in a rural area. I mean, it's nonsense that needs to be on a brownfield site. Go to some of these sites. They've got rats running around. They're all places where they've just about got away with being built, and it's just appalling to see the conditions that children live in. Your constituents, Julie, your constituents, yet children have completely not adequate facilities just because they come from a certain community. I think it's a disgrace that you haven't met with the travelling community over the past 5 years as an MP? Of course, no. You've met with the Travellers Trust. You said you met with the Travellers Trust. That is not the same as meeting with actual constituents from that community. The Travellers Trust work on behalf of travelling and travellers.
But they look after their interests, so they're
a representative body, but you meet with residents in all of the parts. Why don't you go onto the Travellers site and go and have a chat with some of your constituents there? I'd love to see that. To be honest, I mean, the Huntington site, you put in an objection to the Malton Road. It's near Monk's Cross. It was a very small site. All we knew about it was that the travellers would be sighted there. There were a few caravans. Julian's submission to the local plan claimed about the damage it would do to the local economy. Now, if anyone's been to Monk's Cross is a massive development with shopping centres, everything. The idea that you put a small traveller site there, and that's going to deter people from going to Monk's Cross is complete nonsense. And it's just clearly trying to impose at all costs. We need to house people from all communities in York, and sometimes that's unpopular. And we need to be breaking down the barriers between gypsies and travellers and the settled community in York. And as an MP, I'll show some leadership on that. I won't go to public meetings like Julian did in Elkington and just listen to some of the, I mean, some of the comments that made there were outrageous. There was one proposed site in Elkington for the Gypsy and Traveller community. There was a very, very small site for one family of the show people community who were already there, who had nowhere else to go and walk. And effectively, the Tories opposing the family's application just to expand to stand on the caravans so their children can live there. Otherwise, they'd have to leave where they live. And you got up there, you listened to what people were saying, you sided with them against Emma Peel and her family, and I think you should be ashamed of that.
And I met Emma Peel, spoke to her afterwards, and actually that wasn't what the meeting was about. The meeting was fundamentally about a traveller site for 8 pitches right in the centre of Arlington Village on Greenbelt land. And there was 250 people at that public meeting. I've held public meetings right around my constituency on all these issues, listening to local constituents and local residents. They are open public meetings. Anyone can attend. I would never turn anyone away. And it's to listen to public view, because as a good MP or a good councillor or a good politician, you should be out there, you should be listening to the voice of those communities. And I would love you to go and stand up and talk around your council about what you've just said here, because I'm not sure how well, Joe, it would actually go around.
That's the difference between me and you, Julian. I will say what people don't want to hear sometimes when it's the right thing to do. You will just listen to the crowd. You will just listen to what's popular.
I'm not going to play to the audience, Joe.
I mean, I'll say that's James again.
Well, I think Joe's got a bit of political amnesia here and is hoping that you all have a really short memory as well, because the bedroom tax was actually introduced by the last Labour government. It was introduced for people in the private rented sector, and they only complained when we brought it into the public rented sector. But the truth is that the government has made money available to alleviate some of the worst problems it causes. The Lib Dem Council in Stockport has used that money to guarantee that nobody who can't find a smaller house or flat has to pay any more. In Bradford, the Lib Dems and the Labour Party came together to achieve that same objective. Here in York, the Labour Party have said, oh no, we won't do that, we'll just blame those filthy Lib Dems instead. And they're playing politics with ordinary people's lives.
Sorry, can you answer my question?
I'm coming on to it, because I think we need, on the travel issue, I think we need to start by saying something that too many politicians don't say. And that's that travellers actually should have somewhere to go. And it's absolutely right that national politicians set that as a right, and that's what the person who's elected as your MP should be doing. But it should be up to the local authority to decide exactly where that area is. And it's crazy, the greenfield areas have been suggested by the council. And I'm somewhat bemused as well by Joe's suggestion that there were rats on brownfield sites. Have you never been to the country? There's wildlife all over the shop.
We're talking about the specific traveller sites on your
But it rather defeats the point of having a green belt if you start allowing people to move onto it. We do have brownfield areas in York which are crying out for redevelopment, which are often the hardest to get people to get new build onto. So, as temporary traveller sites, I think a lot of these would actually be ideal, primarily because so many of them are near schools. And we know that the children of travellers are often way behind in their education already. We need to make sure that they've got access to decent school education above all other things. And if we shun them out into the country so that they're out of sight, out of mind, then we are letting those children down.
Okay, thank you. Lady in the front.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm Ginny Shaw and I'm the Green Party parliamentary candidate for York Outer, so thanks for allowing me to ask this question. Yes, my question is, because background is that I'm a housing professional and I chaired a housing association in York, so meeting the needs of people in housing need in York for 13 years. My question is, given the housing crisis, leaving almost 4,000 priority homeless households on the City of York Council waiting list, what is the panel's response to the Greens pledge to build 500,000 new social rented homes by 2020?
Joe, how are you tackle this?
I would welcome any proposal to increase the supply of housing. I think the Greens need to perhaps be clear as to how they're going to fund those 500,000 homes.
We have been.
I think everyone knows what I'm talking about here. But, I don't want to be flippant because I want to. I think affordable housing in York is a hugely important issue, and it's one of the dividing lines at a local level as well. I'd be interested to hear the Greens as to responses to where they're going to locate them in York, and where how many homes they want to build a year in York in the local plan. But I believe in, the coalition have cut the affordable housing budget by 75%. We've had in York suggestions that having cut the affordable housing budget, they then think that we should reduce the affordable housing targets that developers have to meet to build affordable housing within their developments. Now that just completely reduces the supply of housing. In terms of the numbers on the local plan, the Labour Party has lobbied for more, and sometimes that's unpopular again. Julian's been leading the charge, opposing developments just about everywhere. But we need to tackle the housing crisis. We have the highest rents in York, in the north of England. I can't afford a one-bedroom flat myself. We're living with this crisis. We desperately need to increase supply. The average price of a house in York is about 7.5 times average income. That's just completely unsustainable. And the only way we're going to get out of that is by increasing the supply of affordable. The Labour Party will build at least 200,000 homes a year by 2020, which I don't think in itself is enough, but the building up the capacity for building skills and so on takes time, and we need to do that. But I believe in council housing as well. I think we should allow local authorities the ability to borrow in order to create an asset and increase the supply of council housing. Because it's been depleted since Thatcher had the right to buy, and we're suffering ever since. We also need to increase the security of tenure for people in the private rented sector, and have some security and have longer tenancies, and stop estate agents from ripping people off. So I support the idea of building hundreds of thousands of affordable homes. A Labour government will do something similar. I welcome Green's proposal. I'll just be curious as to where they want to build them in York.
James,
you're absolutely right that we've got a housing crisis. We've got too many people in need of a home, or often crammed in a home that's too small for their family. And this is because we have not been building enough homes. Joe talked about the right to buy, but the real problem is that actually There were less social housing built under Blair than there were under Thatcher, which I think tells you a lot about the modern Labour Party today. Now, the problem with the Greens' suggestions, which became clear during Natalie Bennett's rather infamous interview, is that you're taking no allowance for the cost of the land you want to build these houses on. And you've got to do that. It's often the most valuable part of the actual housing. So we have got a manifesto pledge for 300,000 new homes to be built as new towns where they're needed. Built as new towns rather than additions to new ones, so that we're not adding to urban sprawl, but making sure we have new communities which have the things they need, like shops, schools, pubs and clubs, all those things you need to have, not just a home, but a working community, because a home is much more than just bricks and mortar.
Yeah. Julian, you've been quite outspoken on opposing development plans.
Development in the Greenbelt, yeah. I'll take this in two. I'll take the national housing first and then come back to local and some of it Joe said, if that's okay. Housing supply actually is now at its highest level since the end of the housing boom in 2008, and empty homes are at a 10-year low. So there's quite a bit been happening, not enough I do accept, but there has been quite a bit been happening on that. We've got the fastest rate of affordable house building for over 2 decades at the moment. Obviously we went through, with the economic crisis that we, as a country, we suffered, house building just completely stopped. It wasn't the fact that sites weren't available, but the economic crisis killed house building. So that is now starting to move again, and as house building moves again, as a number of people have already said, then the affordable homes on that will start to come forward again as well. And absolutely right that we need to build more houses on brownfield site. David Cameron came out only last week and has pledged that there's going to be, he wants more than 200,000 brownfield homes, and they will be sold at a 20% discount for first-time buyers under 40. And James rightly talks about some of these new towns. I mean, Ebbsfleet, there's a big development being proposed and being pushed forward by government and supported by the Labour Party in the House of Commons as well. This has got cross-party support. To be fair, I was in the statements about that last week. Ebbsfleet is going forward and there's going to be a huge building project, new town building project on brownfield land. So again, these are the sort of things and schemes that the government has to work on and work closely with. And also, George Osborne only recently talked about the putting aside funding and asking local authorities to bid for funding to open up brownfield land that has been quite difficult to access and develop. Because always the problem sometimes with brownfield land is it's the cost of developing, the cost of getting into it that causes problems. And this brings me back onto the local stuff, because we have got some very important brownfield sites in York that have not been developed. Nothing has happened with them. The British Sugar site, the York Central site. And also, when you talk about affordable housing, and Joe talks about affordable housing, the targets on affordable housing, and I think he mentioned that the Conservatives on the York Council had opposed, I think, Labour's original 50% affordable housing target and wanted to see it reduced. Now, there's a classic example of how Labour failed on this. If those of you are from the Clifton Moor area, or know Clifton Moor and that area, in my constituency, there's a site there, the old grain store site, the old intervention site, that's a brownfield site that has not come forward for development at all. We've actually got an application coming forward, but the council put on a very high level of affordable housing. It was about 30–40%, and it got refused. It got, the developers wouldn't bring it forward on that level. And they appealed it. And they won the appeal, and now that site is going to be built with no affordable housing on it at all, because the council wouldn't negotiate with the developers to get it down to a level that was affordable for the developers to build it and deliver affordable housing. And for me, that was a classic failure of this council not delivering housing for York's people. So Joe can talk about the local plan and how we've got to build more houses and we've got to put them all in the green belt. Let's get those brownfield sites going first. And the Labour Party in York has failed on that time and time again. And this is why, as a government, as a coalition government, we've put money in for local authorities to bid to get brownfield sites moving. I completely accept the York Central site is a very difficult site to develop, but it's also an exceptionally important site for the city to get moving, and nothing has been happening on that. Hopefully things will start moving if the council can get hold of some of this coalition government money that they put into it. But again, sadly, things should have been moving early on these sites.
Thank you.
I would just like to repeat that. I said social rented, and this idea that they're always affordable is not...
It's enough about housing. So do we have any student issues, potentially? Let's go at the front here.
Yes, so trans rights was mentioned earlier, and transsexual rights were mentioned earlier, and as an LGBTQ person, I'm wondering why you, Julian, voted against the Marriage Equality Bill, and what the other two would do to improve LGBTQ rights in the UK.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I did vote against it, and I don't know whether you wrote to me on this. I did have a lot of constituents write to me on this at the time, for quite a long period of time as we built up to it. And I'm sure there is some constituents in the room who did write to me about it, and will have had a response back from me on it, they will know that for me this was a very difficult decision. It was a balanced decision that I had to take. Firstly, listening to your constituents and the constituents who contact you about the issue. And to be honest, the vast majority of the constituents who contacted me were against it. But the second point for me was also my religious beliefs. And thirdly, balanced against my beliefs as a Conservative in freedom. And they were, if I'm honest, and I put in the letter to anyone who wrote to me, at complete conflict with this issue. So it was a very difficult decision for me. I thought long and hard about it. It wasn't party political, it was a complete free vote across all the political parties, I'm led to believe. So this wasn't about a whipped issue or anything like that, either way. But it was a very difficult decision for me, and ultimately I did vote against it. It got through with a big majority, and if I'm honest, since it has been through, one of my close friends got married, and I went there and I had a great time. It was a very good thing, a very good ceremony, and it did make me think, if I'm honest, whether I had done the right thing. But ultimately I did vote against it, and it was a tough decision for me. Anyone who wrote to me about it at the time and contacted me at the time would have known that in the response they got back.
James, how would you have voted?
Well, I think there's much more to a wedding than a marriage than the ceremony on the day. Certainly I'm sure my wife would say herself. And as I said right from the start of my speech, you know, what I believe in above all other things really is the freedom for somebody to be who they are and want to be. And at the end of the day, if you've got religious reasons you don't believe in gay marriage, you know what? You should be perfectly free not to marry a man. But
that joke's been used before.
I'm sure it has, it's an old one. But, you know, there's no way that the ability for other people who love one another to marry one another does not diminish my marriage to a woman in any respect whatsoever. And I just think it's incredible to even try and make that argument. We've got opt-outs to make sure that churches, that other religions that don't agree with this, with the gay marriage, can say that we don't want to have this on our premises. Of course, there are some groups, you know, we have some Jewish groups, we have some Christian groups, particularly Quakers and Unitarianism, who actually support these wholeheartedly. And they've got the freedom to have these ceremonies on their grounds as well. So we've increased freedom, and this is yet another one of those cases where if it were not for Liberal Democrats in government, you would not be able to enjoy this freedom today because they would not have done it by themselves. On the issues of transgender and transsexual issues, I completely support you there as well. I'm really proud that my party is the first of the big three to have openly transgender people standing for Parliament at general elections. Hopefully one of those might get in at this general election, one or even more, that would be super, and help to raise what I think is a really important profile. Because we've come so far in terms of gender and sexual rights. I have friends in their 60s and 70s who have criminal records because they were caught with somebody they loved before, I think it was 1967, when such things became legal. And that is completely wrong. We've got so much further to go in all manner of these issues, but frankly, the Conservative Party won't do it on their own, and the Labour Party was so mealy-mouthed and half-hearted about it, they could only bring in a civil partnership, which really was an opt-out in order to make it clear that you were some kind of second-class citizen. You are just as good as every other person in our society, and you should be free to live your life, marrying or not marrying whoever you want.
Okay, how do you defend your party's position on these issues?
It's not very difficult really, because I mean, James mentioned civil partnerships. Civil partnerships were a step on the way, and that was a massive shift at the time. And obviously, these things have progressed over the years. I'm pleased that the Parliamentary Labour Party made that happen. It was a minority of Tory MPs who voted for it. It was resounding majorities of the Lib Dem and Labour MPs who voted for gay marriage, for equal marriage. Sorry. And we have a very good record on gay rights under Blair. I mean, you think back to 1997, Ben Bradshaw, who was the Labour MP for Exeter, stood he was standing in Exeter, which was a Tory-held seat, and he was openly gay. And his Tory opponent described him as, I think, Ben or something like that, and led a really vicious campaign against him. That's where we were in 1997, and people could get away with doing that. They can't get away with doing that now, except possibly in certain other parties who aren't here. I believe the guy in question has joined UKIP anyway, so I think going forward we need to, I mentioned trans equality, we need to go to the issue. It's not a sexuality issue, but the same kind of prejudices against trans people have been prejudices held against gay people in the past, and I think we need to look at recognition about people shouldn't be, if people don't see them, don't feel that they define as being male or female, we should respect that. And I think also we need to do a lot more international work in the fight for LGBT equality. I hope everyone will be disturbed by seeing what's been happening in Russia over the past few years, and we need an international alliance to stand up and fight this kind of prejudice. I think we have a very good proud record to stand on, and as a Catholic, I was very happy to support gay marriage. It doesn't come into it for me. I believe in equality for everybody, regardless of religious preference. I don't think that to me comes into it. Just 5 seconds on Jimmy's point on social housing. I think in York our targets. Effectively, most of it is social housing, and there's some affordable discount sale which then gets converted into social housing. So virtually all of these Section 106 housing ends up being social housing anyway.
Okay, great. A couple more questions. This lady in the red jacket and the gentleman with the dark jumper over there. Johnny, Mary. Put your hand up. Okay, lady in the red jacket.
Thank you. I always think in politics, money is extremely high on the agenda, which is understandable, but it's been proven time and time again that money doesn't bring happiness. Where is happiness on the political agenda for this country, with depression rates going up, youth self-harm going up, suicide going up? What are your opinions on this? Thank you.
James?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's vital that the government take account of this, and that's why we've been calling for additional money to be made available specifically for mental health treatments on the NHS. I know that many people at university find themselves in a vulnerable new situations where they're away from home, where they can often succumb to these problems, so we need a particular focus here. In terms of a wider happiness, well, as I said earlier, you know, I want people to be able to be free to follow their own goals in life, and that's the wider route of how we can increase happiness. But the government can do so much more than it is currently doing by supporting treatments through the NHS. As it is currently, if you're suffering from depression, then you can find that it's very hard to get CBT treatments in your locality, which are often proven to be the most useful for most people with this illness. You can find that you're waiting many months for a treatment. When you do get a treatment, you can find that actually it's little more than a kind of a setup a bit like this, where 100 fellow sufferers are given a lecture by a doctor rather than one-on-one treatment, which might be more appropriate. So as I said, we've earmarked £8 billion over the next Parliament to provide what is vitally needed treatment. It's something like 1 in 4 people will suffer from depression or another mental illness in their lifetime. I have been one of those, and the treatment I received was late, but it was vital. It was a little too late for my brother, who had much worse depression than me and has been unable to work for several years. That is the root cause, that is the root effect of what not treating depression well has. We need to make sure that it's treated so people can get a good recovery and get back to living their lives.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Jay?
Right, sorry, it's miles away. No, I think what James has said. I'm taking notes on my phone. No. I think what James said is absolutely right. I think the thing with mental health treatment and funding in the NHS was always been the Cinderella service, and I think there's a cross-party recognition that needs to change whenever they disagree about the structure of the health service. But I think the question was about happiness, wasn't it?
Where is it on the agenda?
Where is happiness on the agenda? And you make a very good point. It's a difficult question to answer, because happiness is not something that you can simply define in terms of money and financial status. We are, as a society, moving toward a sort of, we're more disconnected, there's less interaction within communities, and I think that's something that everyone needs to bear in mind. I don't know how much of an answer I've got in terms of where happiness needs to be on the agenda. Clearly, it needs to be taken more seriously, but in terms of mental health support, it is about the holistic services. It's not just about treatments provided. It's about how people are treated in the benefit system, for instance, which has a huge impact, again, saying about not being financial, but the financial aspects that contribute to everyone's mental health and their choices that they can make. So we need to, that's why some of the cuts, not just directly in mental health services at the local authority, we're struggling because of the reductions to the block rate, but it's about how the whole system fits together, and I think that needs to be taken into account when people are making decisions, how they're going to affect people's well-being, happiness, and so on. So I don't feel I've given you a very good answer, but I think it's a very good question.
Thank you. So Julian?
Happiness isn't high enough on the agenda, on the political agenda. I think you're absolutely right. I suppose the difficulty is how you measure happiness, isn't it? Because happiness will be different to different people, and everyone in this room will sort of judge their happiness in different ways. But it's not high enough on the agenda. And what drives sort of the broader sort of community happiness? Well, I would say it's your environment, and it is your community. I think that's where local authorities, politicians can do a lot more. I think you need a good local environment. You need good communities. We mustn't build and move away from the sort of community environments to these sort of dormitory towns and villages where people just sort of live and never see anyone. They don't socialise, they don't get involved. And I think for me, that's one of the great things about York Outer. We have some fantastic communities all around York Outer who have great things going on with a great community activities, whether it's in Dullington with the Village in Bloom, which brings all people together out and about as an activity, whether it's your local sports clubs getting involved. There's so many different things going on, and I think that's the key thing that drives it. And where politicians can get involved there is to make sure that there isn't policies or funding issues that block those communities from moving forward. So I'm very much driving from a community point of view for me and your local environment. But I do think, money doesn't drive it, I do accept that. But I do think economic security and job security have an influence on it. And I think that is one thing that does drive sort of happiness on a wider scale as well. I think what you're going to have here, you're going to have on what Jane said, and to a certain degree what Joe said, on the mental health side, I entirely agree. Mental health has been undoubtedly a Cinderella service within the health service for far too long. Over the previous government and to a certain extent under the coalition government. And I think that has to be definitely raised further up the agenda. And the problem with mental health services, if mental health isn't detected early enough and treated early enough, then that gives rise to a lot of other conditions that cause much more severe problems. And the problem is it has in the past been brushed under the carpet at both primary and secondary care level, and I think there's a lot more has to be done on mental health services. And to be fair, that's something the Liberal Democrats have been talking about a lot recently, and I think it's got all because they've been raising it, I think it's got all the other political parties talking about it as well, which I think is a good thing. It's something that I hope that whatever the future government is, it's something that whichever future government is really grasps on, because I think it has to be done.
Okay, great. James, did you get a microphone?
I'd like to know where all parties stand in terms of the privatisation of public services. It seems that our public services are being privatised by the day, by stealth. And I'm afraid that I feel I can't trust the Tory party with any kind of public service. The Labour Party has a very sad history in terms of privatising public services. Since the 1990s, it has been privatising almost all aspects of social care. Most aspects of social care are now privatised without the public having much idea of it happening. Practically all services are now chargeable. Many of our custodial services are privatised, and it seems that this government has no sympathy for or wish to pursue public service. The Labour Party, I'm so disappointed with, and I just don't know where the Lib Dems stand at all. What I do know is that within a few years' time there will be no public services in this country at all. It will all be privatised, and the role of local authorities will simply be as purchasers.
Okay. I didn't really see a question. Did you have a question, or was you just making a point?
The question is, where do all the parties stand on the funding of public services in the future, private or public?
Okay, thank you. So, Julian, is there a comment? Where do you stand?
Well, I think if you take one of the biggest public services and one of the biggest, most important public services to all of us and to our country, the National Health Service, that ultimately for me has to stay in public hands. I wouldn't see any political party moving away from that. There is private companies have access to certain areas within it, and that was brought about, to be fair, by the previous Labour government. And one thing that was completely wrong about that was they brought it in for to be fair to them, it was done for a specific reason. It was done to get waiting lists and waiting times down. So basically what happened was they paid private companies to do, for example, hip operations, but they paid over the tariff price. If you're familiar with the NHS service tariff price, they paid, I think it was 12-13% over tariff. So basically that meant that private companies were coming in to do hip operations to get waiting targets down, but were getting paid more than the physical hospital was getting paid within their budget. And I think that was completely wrong. And we changed that. That was stopped. So any private operation that is outside the NHS, because you've got a backlog or anything like that within the particular service, that now is paid at the same price as the NHS hospital, paid in tariff. And we stopped that. And I think it was the right thing to do. And that's where the privatisation side, that side of it really started. But ultimately, the NHS is still there in its current form and should stay in its current form. You know, it is absolutely sacrosanct to our nation, to the way we've been built, and to our long-term health that we invest in it. And this government has invested heavily in the National Health Service, and it will continue to do that. Because if we don't, because there is a real issue here in the health service, if we don't, we've got an ageing population. So we're all living longer. We're all living longer because medical science is moving on, we're getting access to new drugs, so it's all a plus point. But because we're living longer, that's causing more and more strain on both adult social care and the NHS. So ultimately, you know, any EU government is going to have to continue to fund and protect the NHS budget going forward. It has to. And it will.
Social care that you never referred to?
Let's try and pick up the responses because we are coming to the end of the event. So, Joe?
Right, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think it's over 90% now of social care services that are in the private or voluntary sector, and that has been a trend, as you correctly identified, that started from the 1990s, and some of it did occur under a Labour government. And I work in service with a voluntary sector provider. I've worked directly with providers. And the thing about this, I mean, if you look at the whole rise of zero-hour contracts and home care and the scandal of people being paid appallingly badly, sometimes not even the minimum wage, the driver for this has always been saving money. The amount that you spend on an in-house contract for social care is massively different. It's massively more than it is for a privatised one. That's why they've always done it. It doesn't mean, but the impact on quality and on the workforce and on the service users is terrible. So you have to identify why it's happening. And then how do we get from where we are here to where we need to be? And I agree with you. I think things should be done in-house. I think things should be done comprehensively in the public sector. And there is a role for the voluntary sector to play in health and social care. But it's a supporting role. We need an integrated national health and social care service. And that is the opportunity to bring in, as an umbrella, all these disparate organisations, bring it back together into something coherent that works together, and then start to look at the terms and conditions that staff are getting paid, which is dire, I know, because I'm paid it, and the whole correlation between low pay and poor service and high staff turnover. I believe in public services. I alluded to it in my speech. I opposed not just some of the privatisations that went on the New Labour, but I opposed foundation hospitals, market into the NHS. I've got a whole long line of Irish nurses in my family who worked in the NHS. I've worked in the NHS as a healthcare assistant. As far as any candidate you could have here standing up for Labour, I am categorically in favour of public services, and I believe that we should start to get back to things being in-house, publicly provided, so you have the control over those services democratically, and you have control over the quality, and we don't have a fragmented service. I won't have time to just have a go at everything Julian's just said, because it bears no relation to reality, that we've had billions of contracts that are going out since the top-down reorganisation that they said they were never going to do. More and more services going out to private providers. And unless we get a Labour government, this is the thing people are going to think about in this election, unless we get a Labour government, then it will be so far gone that we won't get it back. And you've got to think about that. I will be a voice in Parliament pushing for as much public provision as you could want, but we need a majority Labour government to deliver integration and stop the privatisation. And just, by the way, exclude the NHS from TTIP, and in its current form, getting rid of TTIP completely, because it's a Trojan horse for privatisation.
Okay, James, quickly if you can to...
Sure, no problem. But, well, the last Labour government gave out about 5% of the NHS's budget to the private sector, and they're now screaming blue murder that we're setting off the NHS completely and it's going to cause absolute disaster because we're contracting out 8% of the budget. So the idea that we are selling it off sways, that we're doing anything dramatically different from what Labour have done or would do in the future is nothing short of fantasy, quite frankly. And as Julie correctly pointed out, the amount of money that the private sector organisations were being given to carry out operations was more than the NHS was doing it for themselves. So I would see a level playing field, because at the end of the day, if you're waiting for your hip operation, I don't think you mind who delivers it, you mind that it's delivered quickly, safely, more than anything else. And both public and private sectors can do that. We've protected the NHS budget as it is, and that's why public satisfaction statistics show that the NHS is, people are happier with it than they have been over the last 5 years right now. We do need some reforms. Joe talked about 0-hour contracts, which some staff are on. Of course, the Labour Party promised to abolish them in their 1997 general election manifesto. What happened in those 13 years they were in power there? We had 0-hour contracts. Now, there are abuses of those, and we need to clamp down on those. People shouldn't be tied into them. But some people do appreciate the freedom that they give them as well, the flexibility to work around their family, work around other jobs, work around being self-employed perhaps. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we've got to be careful as well. We only have so much money, and the population is getting older, with more problems being caused by ill health and ageing. So we can't just say, oh, we'll spend some more money on the NHS. We've got to radically reform things to actually spend that money as efficiently and effectively as possible. And frankly, the Labour Party are just saying, well, it's just a couple of percent in it, isn't it? But apparently it's, we're tearing the whole thing down, it's fantasy.
You want to keep costs down, don't give money away to the private sector. Private healthcare is more expensive.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to move on because we have to have a last question. So I'm actually going to take it to Twitter just so I know I'm getting it. So it's directed at James. James, how are you going to win back the student vote over the tuition fees? And how will you let down the poor generation of students?
Well, for starters, I don't accept the premise of your question that I let down students. I don't accept that the Lib Dems let down students. Because at the end of the day, we didn't win the last general election. We came third out of 3 parties nationally, and the other 2 parties wanted to accept the Brown report in full. Now that came out after the general election when votes had been cast, funnily enough, and what did it show? It wanted no cap on tuition fee support, and it wanted no support grants. We could have stayed outside of the government and allowed the Conservatives to rule by themselves. That is what you would have got. It's also what the Labour Party would have given you at that point as well. So, as I said earlier in the question about the whip, I do believe higher education should be free. People making arguments about, well, you're benefiting from it, so you should pay for it. That's precisely the same argument Conservative politicians were making in the 19th century when Liberal politicians were saying the government ought to pay for children to go to primary school. We all benefit from being surrounded by smart people. It's good for us in terms of our economy, it's good for us in terms of the happiness agenda that the lady at the front asked about as well. And I think it's the ugliest form of politics the Labour Party have come out with their... They promised not to bring in tuition fees, won a general election with a stonking majority, and brought them in. And then they said, oh, we're sorry, we won't raise them. Then they won a general election with a stonking majority, had every choice what they could do, and increased them. Then they wanted the Brown report. As soon as we had a compromise between our two parties, which I'm sure neither party is happy with, then they would say, oh, well, we'll abolish the lot. But now, they're saying, oh, well, what we'll do, we'll grab a headline by saying, well, we'll knock a couple of grand for the tuition fees headlines. But don't take my word for it. Take an independent person like Martin Lewis, the money saving expert website man. As he's pointed out, their headline-grabbing policy will actually only help you if when you graduate, you walk into a job earning 35 grand a year and keep on earning significantly more than graduates in other jobs. So that won't help teachers, it won't help nurses, it's going to help investment bankers. And do you know what? I think if the government's going to help people in this country, bankers are doing all right.
Right. Joe, how do you respond to this?
Right, okay. I don't really know what to say in response to James. I mean, I'll start with the Brown report. The Brown report was commissioned. The thing about a report, when you commission it, you don't have to accept what's in it. There's plenty of reports commissioned by government where they see the recommendation and they say, no, there was no recommendation.
Take it, manifesto.
We didn't say we implement every single recommendation. That's rubbish. That is not. It is not true. Plenty of. I mean, what Peter Mandelson wanted to do was not the settled will of the parliamentary Labour parties. The idea that we were going to bring in 9 grand fees or whatever. What was it? Unlimited fees. I can't remember. It was a ridiculous proposal. As I mean, I don't know actually if I did say it. I have always been. I went on demonstrations against the last Labour government. When we brought in top-up fees. It was a disgraceful betrayal of students back then. And I opposed it. It was completely wrong. I believe in free education funded by the taxpayer. Not because James's sort of elitist sounding thing about we all benefit from being around smart people. It's about you know, whether people can pursue what they want to do, you know, to get a job, to pursue education for employment and just for education's sake. We should fund that collectively, and you shouldn't be taxed on the basis of how educated you are. You should be taxed on the basis of your ability to pay. I believe in it being for progressive taxation. We have brought in new policy to reduce tuition fees, to get nearer to that principle, funded by ending tax reliefs on pensions. And if you've got that much to contribute to your pension, you're doing okay. And I think it's a fair funding source. As I say, it's not as far as we should go. I had a long and interesting route into higher education. It took me a long time to graduate. I dropped out. I worked for a while. And there were obstacles along the way. I know that I could never have graduated under 9 grand fees. And to be frank, I couldn't have graduated under 6 grand fees either.
Do you realise repayments are lower than what they were in the old system?
I understand the issue about repayments, but the whole point, James, is that if you implement a system where you don't expect people, well, the whole point of it is that you're paying them around a year, but then half the population doesn't end up doing it. It's a failure of your policy objective. It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask Julian to speak because we're going to tie off.
There's a few points that haven't been mentioned so far in this whole debate within tuition fees. I mean, tuition fees was a deeply controversial issue, there's no doubt about it, and you know, there was a lot of anger from a large number of students 5 years ago over that. It was a decision that was taken in a climate where government and departmental cuts of up to 40% were having to be made, given the economic situation we were facing. However, 5 years on, let's just have a look at the universities and how they're doing. 5 years on, the sky hasn't fallen in. Student numbers are a record high. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds, the number of students going from disadvantaged backgrounds has gone up by 20% over the last 5 years. And most importantly, because of the stronger economy, based around the difficult decisions that the coalition government had to take, the career prospects of students when they're leaving university is much higher. And ultimately, you go to university because you want to get on, you want to better yourself, you want a career and a job at the end of it. And you need those jobs there at the end of it, at the end of the university. You need those career prospects. And they're a lot stronger now, 5 years on, than they were when the coalition came to government. And I think that is the point that's been missing from this debate so far. Secondly, for me, and as the MP for the last 5 years going around and talking, and many times coming to the university, the thing that everyone keeps telling me, it's not about the tuition fees. It's actually about the cost of living within student life, because they're the upfront costs you have to pay, the rent, the housing, the food costs. The tuition fees are something that isn't paid upfront. So that's the real cost, and that's the real issue that might put students off coming to university. And that for me is the key thing, because university should be open for all. Now, so on the Labour policy, I mean, I think it's absolutely garbage what's come out. It's just pure political propaganda to sort of suddenly strike the tuition fees down from 9,000 to 6,000, 1,000. It will ultimately cause real problems for the universities economically. So already universities like York are saying, well, you can't, this will cause real problems for us here. But there is a point which I think I'd like our party to investigate and look on, which has come out, and that is the increase, the £400 increase that has already been proposed in the maintenance grant, and I think it was capped at 46,000, was it? There was a family of a joint income of 46,000. But basically, you know, the maintenance grant, they were proposing, it was a proposal to put up the maintenance grant by £400 a year, but it was capped on a household budget of, I think, 46,000, I think, if I'm correct, 42. And I think that is something that does need looking at. I think it's too crude what's happened there, because I still think with that figure, whether it's 42 or 46 on it, it's not my policy, so I'm not 100% certain on it, but you know, whatever that figure is, it still delivers what's called a cliff edge. So if it's 42 and your family income is 43, you get nothing. But if it's 42 or 41, then you get the maintenance. And for me, those cliff edges with these things are a problem, and I think it should be more taken. But I certainly think that is something that the future government, and we might hear something, I'm not privy to it over the next few weeks. My party hasn't come out yet with its position on this, but I think it's something that does need looking at, because for me that is the bigger issue than actually the tuition fees itself.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to have to wrap up, so I'd like to invite Julian to speak for only 1 minute, very quickly, to wrap up and try to convince the electorate why they should vote for you.
Gosh, 1 minute.
Yeah.
That's very difficult for a politician to talk for 1 minute.
Your 1 minute started.
Listen, I want Britain to be one of the most successful countries in the world. And I said at the beginning about the economy, and it is about the economy. But I want York and the surrounding areas to play a key role in that. And the university is integral to York's economy. And we've seen the success of that with the science park and the spin-offs and the small companies that are coming back, and many students from York who are still here and have got successful companies and successful careers on the back of it. And I think that's important, and the technological, so the agro-tech, which the university is investing in, is going to be part of that for the future. But we have to have a city in York that continues to drive forward, and we have to get investment in our local infrastructure as well. And for me, that's something, as an MP, if I'm re-elected, I will continue to push for. Infrastructure, not only just in the roads, in the Northern Ring Road, but rail investments, Haxby Station, We've just heard today that the electrification of the York-Harrogate-Leeds line is now going forward in the next control period. So all that is good news. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still going to be here banging the drum about the green belt. I know Joe doesn't agree with me on that, and maybe a lot of people in the room don't agree with that, but I will be doing it because I'll be holding public meetings across the constituency. Continue to do that, because MPs should be accessible at all times, and that's why I hope I've been over the past 5 years, and I will continue to do that if I'm re-elected.
Okay, thank you very much. James?
Conservatives are focusing too much on tax cuts, primarily at wealthy people, and cuts on services that all of us depend upon. Whereas Labour are promising more spending, they're opposing every cut the government's made, but they've been quite public they would cut just as much money if they'd have won the last general election. On tuition fees, on the economy and on jobs, they've got a short memory, and they're hoping that you all do too. So I really hope we prove them wrong. We want to finish the job. Whatever happens in the next general election, I think all three parties are going to have to work together in at least an informal way. We're going to have to work on finishing the job of balancing the books after the financial crisis of 5 years ago. So we've got to balance those books, but we've got to continue to protect the NHS. We've got to continue to protect our education spending. I want to make sure we've got quality healthcare for all, particularly mental healthcare. Environmental protection, which is fit for my grandchildren. Educational investment, so there's a qualified teacher in every school, every classroom, so that children get the very best start in life, because that is the critical way that we will move forward as a country.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've really enjoyed the debate, and thank you to everybody for coming. I've got to go back to one thing Callum said right at the start of this, which wasn't true. This constituency only was created in 2010. It was made up from 4 other constituencies. The Liberal Democrats have never held this constituency, and their vote over the past few years has completely collapsed. The Labour Party is picking up the votes. I've been out canvassing for the past year, and I know that people who are angry over tuition fees, who are angry over the betrayals they've done in government, have come over to us. I stand as a proud socialist, trade unionist, Labour candidate who will stand up for what I believe in. Whether you agree with me or whether you disagree with me, I will stand in the same place. And I believe we desperately need a different government, a better government, a government that puts the interests of ordinary people first, that puts the interests of the poorest people in our society first and not last. And I look forward to debating more, also with Jimmy in the future. I appreciate why they had to do the format, but I look forward to the debate with the Greens, and thanks very much for this opportunity to see you.
Thank you.